Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I reached the yard just after dawn, the sky the colour of old steel, the air heavy with the wet smell that rises off ballast after a night of rain. Interstate 70 was a parking lot behind me. Every ramp was clogged with stalled cars and panicked drivers who had tried to push through the previous evening and never moved again. I ditched my truck 2 miles east of the Kansas River Bridge and cut south along side streets until the skyline of Kansas City fell away behind warehouses and grain elevators. The Argentine district had always been industrial, brick, concrete, and tracks braided like veins. That morning, it felt like a map I could read, even with the labels torn off. I had worked maintenance in big freight yards before: Chicago, North Platte, a few temp contracts farther west. The bones are all the same: ladder tracks, a repair depot, a wheel shop, a diesel fueling stand, storage tanks, and a tower with a view of everything. This yard, on the south side of town, near the bluff that looks over the river, had the same layout. More important, it had fences on 3 sides and, on the 4th, a long wall of stacked containers. If anything could still be defended in a city that had forgotten what order felt like, it was an old freight yard. At the chain-link gate, I saw the padlock cut cleanly and left hanging. Someone had been smarter than I was and got here first. I stepped through and felt the quiet in my stomach. No humming ballast tampers, no clank of couplers, no radios, just wind and the far-off thump of something hitting something else, once, and then again. I kept my hands where I could get to the compact carbine slung across my chest. I don't like pointing it at anything I don't need to, and I told myself today I wouldn't need to. I told myself a lot of things at the beginning. The yard office sat on short concrete stilts with rusted steps up to a metal door. I pushed on it, listened to the rubber seal peel, and walked into the stale air of coffee grounds and oil rags. I called out to keep from surprising anyone. "Hello, maintenance. I'm not here to cause trouble." A figure rose from behind the dispatch desk with both hands raised. A woman in her late 20s with a windbreaker tied around her waist and eyes that had not closed in too many hours. "Don't shoot," she said, voice rough. "I'm Riley. Name's Aaron," I said. "Maintenance supervisor. Or I was. I heard the highway is done. Thought this place might be useful." She nodded, looking past me at the door, listening like I was. "Useful is the word. We've got diesel, water, a roof, and..." She gestured toward the window. "Steel we can move. Anyone else?" She pressed her lips together. "A few. Come on." We crossed the office and stepped onto the catwalk that wrapped the building. From there, the yard opened up, the long throat of ladder tracks, the skeletal gantries of the repair depot, and the fueling island with its blue-painted standpipes. To the west, stacks of shipping containers formed a rough wall. To the east, the main line curved out of sight toward downtown. Riley led me to a reefer container set close under the office eave. The heavy door stood partially open. Inside, a compact inverter was humming, cables feeding LED strips, and a little fridge that sounded like it had a cold. A young guy sat on a milk crate polishing the edges of a welding helmet. "Miguel," he said without looking up. "Good to meet you," I said. "You run that welder out there?" His eyes lifted, suspicious, then softened. "I run what I can keep running. We had a generator, but we blew a belt. Riley found an alternator in a pickup, and I made it work on a shaft. It's not pretty." "Pretty's not the plan," I said. "Working is the plan." Footsteps thumped on the stairs. A man in his mid-30s, trimmed beard, lean the way long-haul drivers get, like they're all cord and tendon. He carried a map book and a radio clipped to his pocket. "Reed," he said, offering a hand. "Daniel Lawson, but everybody calls me Reed. You look like you've actually stood on ballast before." "I have," I said. "When the radios went quiet, I decided I didn't like my odds out there. I figured a yard's got fences, water tanks, tools, enough to make the difference." "Welcome home then?" Reed said, but without any smile. It's been loud at night. They follow sound. We keep the lights down and use hand signals. You carry him because you know, right? I'm carrying because I've seen too many things not to, I said. We'll keep everything safe, Riley cut in, quick and professional. Our rules are simple. Speak clearly, move with a purpose, and don't do hero moves. We help when it's safe. Works for me, I said, and meant it. The last of them emerged from the shadow of the office doorway, carrying an aluminum case like it held something fragile but important. Dark hair in a bun, work shirt with the sleeves rolled, a small ham radio antenna sticking from the case lid. Harper, she said. Electrical engineer. I'd like the lights back. I'd like the yard switches back more. What have you got? I asked. A rat's nest, she said, and a tired grin showed. But a rat's nest I can untangle. Most of the signal relays can be controlled from here if we bypass certain interlocks. No central dispatcher anymore, no digital blocks. It's all ours if we're careful, and we should be careful. We will, I said. We stood in that suspended moment that groups have before they decide if they're going to be a group. I nodded once. Here's what I can bring. I know these depots. I can find batteries and belts, make a generator sing again, get a diesel prime mover to cough into life even if she's been cold for a year. I can keep the water running, keep the lights quiet. We can set this place up so it's not just shelter, it's a position. Reed folded his map closed and tucked it under his arm. Then we're in agreement, he said. We make this place a refuge, but not for long. Mobility is survival. Steel that moves is life. It took all day to learn each other's rhythms. We went slow and methodical. We set up a watch at the catwalk with a pair of binoculars scavenged from the office and an old hand crank siren we agreed to avoid using unless the fence was in real trouble. Miguel walked the perimeter and pointed out the places where the fence ran into open track. We can use cars to plug those, he said, tapping a knuckle on his helmet for emphasis. We tip a few with the loader to make a wedge. They don't climb well if the angle is wrong. Riley kept inventory. Water is decent, she said, ticking lines in a pocket notebook. 2 overhead tanks at the maintenance bay, both about half. A 300-gallon tote in the wheel shop. Filters we can wash and reuse. Bleach. First aid supplies. Better than a glove box, worse than an ambulance. Food's the limiter. Vending machines and what we've carried in. We need protein and calories. We can rig the reefer container off the inverter to keep perishables longer. Harper staked out the old relay cabinet in the office. The wiring diagrams were brittle where the folds had been creased too many times. She traced circuits with a pencil in her finger, muttering. Good news, she said eventually. Most of the yard switches can be hand-thrown. Better news, I can make a few remote throw. If we run a clean 24-volt feed and jumper the lockouts, we'll be able to route cars like chess pieces without going out in the open. Show me where you want power, I said. I'll get you the juice. By late afternoon, the sky had cleared into a thin blue and the distant sound of the city seemed closer. We kept our profiles low. A pair of infected people staggered along the outer fence, snared by the chain link and the barbs. They pressed their faces to the metal for a while, then drifted away again as if the wind had tugged them loose. No one said anything. It was easier that way. We ate that night in the quiet office. Cans of beans warmed on a small butane stove. Crackers, a little jerky. It tasted like fuel and relief. We talked in low voices about what we had learned since it started. Riley described the evacuation train she'd been on, how the conductor kept trying to raise dispatch and got only empty channels. Then paper instructions to hold at a siding forever. Harper explained how she had started scanning after the first curfew notice, how she now knew the rhythm of the repeating emergency broadcast like it was a song stuck in her head. Reed talked about interstates and choke points and how the best-intentioned route plans die at the first blocked off-ramp. I didn't talk much. I kept seeing batteries, belts, hoses and bolts in the corners of rooms. It's how my mind goes when things get bad. Make a list, assemble systems, get pressure where you need pressure. I told them I'd spend the morning walking the depot and finding what we could bring back to life. Start with the generator, Harper said. If we can run air tools and welders without that alternator Rube Goldberg you built, the rest gets easier. Miguel flushed at the mention of Rube Goldberg, then grinned. Guilty. We tried to sleep in shifts on office couches and on flattened cardboard in the reefer. Sleep didn't stick. I lay on my back and listened to the way the wind changes pitch when it runs along a string of cars and slips through coupler gaps, and to the quieter sound beneath it that wasn't the wind. Somewhere out in the western tracks, a chain rattled. Somewhere in the east, someone knocked on steel and then stopped. At first light, I put on the orange vest with reflective tape, habit more than anything. If we were moving cars around, I wanted everyone to see me. The maintenance building was cavernous, windows dusty, the smell of grease thick in the air. A locomotive bay took up the center with a sunken inspection pit, the sides lined with steel cabinets labeled with stencils, belts, hose, filters. I opened each door like I was diffusing something delicate. In a corner, under a tarp, I found the generator, trailer mounted, diesel, big enough to run a crew of welders and a bay of lights without sweating. The fuel line was dry. The batteries were flat. Miguel walked in behind me and whistled low. She's a beast. She's a lifeline, I said. We scrounged 2 heavy batteries from a pickup that someone had parked near the tool cage, and I rigged them in parallel, cleaned the posts, tightened the clamps until the copper showed a shine. Riley showed up with a 5-gallon can from the fueling stand. Smells okay, she said. I cracked the bleeder screws and primed the line until diesel coughed past the trap's air. Ready, I said. When I give a thumbs up, key it. Miguel leaned on the glow plug switch, counted, then turned. The engine turned over slow and stubborn and shook the frame, and then caught. The rumble filled the bay. We didn't cheer. We just grinned at one another, because something in the world still responded when we asked it to. Power bus is live, Harper said on a handheld, voice crackling from the office. I'll bring up the shop lights in rows, no spots pointing out. Keep it tight. We tested the air compressor next. The hose lines hissed as the tank pressurized, gauges climbing steady. Reed carried in a mesh roll of steel and nodded at me. I want this welded over the office windows, he said. If they get close and push, glass won't be the problem. Also want a mesh cage on the generator. Keeps hands out and debris from getting sucked into the radiator. On it, Miguel said, setting his helmet on his head and dropping the shade. One system at a time. We made that our mantra. Harper and I ran new cable to the relay cabinet, stepping over a snake pit of old wire and telephone lines from the analog era. I crimped lugs. She landed them. Reed and Miguel used the yard goat to nudge a short string of empty flats into position as barricades at a gap in the fence. Riley inventoried a cache of chem lights, marked 2 first aid kits with tape, and posted them at the bay doors. Ran a brief class on rapid bandaging and how to use the tourniquet we hoped never to touch. By midday, we had the office windows crossed with welded mesh, the generator enclosed in a protective cage, and the first of the yard switches wired to take a clean 24-volt signal from Harper's panel. She flipped a toggle, and we all watched down the line as the points eased over and locked. It felt like magic in a time that had explained there wasn't any. Late afternoon, the wind carried sound differently. It wasn't just the distance noise of a city without order. It was closer, more purposeful, the kind of sound the infected make when they hear something they can't ignore. Miguel turned off the welding machine and lifted his helmet. We stayed still for a moment, listening. There it was again. A loose, dragging shuffle, and then the rattle of chain link under hands that don't get tired. Reed stepped to the catwalk and raised the binoculars. 4, he said softly. No, 5. They're in police uniform. Rail police, vests, duty belts, radios still clipped on. They're spread along the east fence. Riley breathed out slowly. We do not go to them. We do not engage unless the fence is in danger. They get caught. They'll wander off when they don't see or hear something interesting. They'll hear the generator, Harper said. Then we keep it down to the minimum, I said. Shut down the big air tools, lights off on the east side. We seal the bay doors and sit quiet. We did. The rumble lowered, the lights softened, and the office felt smaller as we gathered at the window. The 5 moved along the fence in a loose line, the way tired people move when they don't have a plan. One wore a high-vis vest with a patch where a radio mic had snagged and torn. They pressed fingers through the chain link and tilted their heads like they heard something whispered. After an hour, they drifted west and were lost among the stacked containers. "We need a proper barricade on that east gap," Reed said finally. Tomorrow, I agreed. Tonight we stay a quiet rock." We slept in rotations again, and the quiet helped. Sometime past midnight, Harper woke me with a hand on my shoulder and an apology already in her eyes. "Sorry," she whispered. "Radio." We went to the office, and she put the little handset on the desk, the antenna propped in the window. She had a small notebook open with frequencies and times. "I've been scanning the 2-meter calling channel, the weather band, the emergency broadcast. Most of it's the same loop. But at 12:17 a.m. and again at 12:23, I got a burst on 146520 that wasn't just chatter. It was an actual structured transmission. Weak. I recorded it." She hit play. Static filled the room, then a voice, flat, thin, like it was traveling too far. "Westbound consist, blocked line, milepost 331, supplies secure, standby units low," then a carrier drop, then silence. 331 would put it west of here," she said. 50 miles, give or take, if we're on the same railroad." "A military freight," Reed said from the doorway. He had that tone he gets when a plan starts to glow behind his eyes. "Supplies secured. That's what I heard." "Or a ghost recording from days ago," I said. "Or bait. Or a stranded crew that's not a crew anymore. We're not the only ones who can scan channels." Riley rubbed her forehead. "We are not leaving tomorrow. We have patients here even if they're not our patients. We have fences that need to be fences and not suggestions." "Agreed," I said. "But we should think about the long game. Diesel doesn't last forever in a tank. Food runs out. If there's a train with supplies inside a reachable radius, it could be a lifeline." "We think," Riley said. "We plan. We don't stampede ourselves into a hole." We stood there listening to the recording again, and this time I counted the background sounds. The clack of a loose coupler, the way the wind hits a string when it's in a low cut, the high whine of an idling auxiliary engine somewhere on the train. It didn't sound like a loop from a studio. It sounded like steel making steel sounds. "Okay," I said finally, "we make decisions in daylight." Daylight brought jobs, and jobs kept us from spinning ourselves thin. We spent the morning plugging east side gaps with flats and hoppers. The yard goats still had air in the tanks, and I topped them off from a portable compressor while Reed took the controls. He nudged cars into position with an easy touch. Where the fence ran close to a set of ladder tracks, we slid a flat flush to the chain link and welded metal plates to connect steel to steel. Miguel and I constructed an angle barricade with a tip gondola that forced anything approaching to squeeze into a funnel we could watch. Harper kept at the relay panel and gave us one more remote throw on the west side so we could build a diversion track, a way to route any noise-drawn group away from our core and down a line toward a dead-end siding. In the afternoon, Riley and I did a food run to a nearby warehouse district. We didn't like leaving the fence, but we needed calories and I didn't want us raiding homes. The warehouse we chose belonged to a distributor for bulk snacks and sports drinks. The loading doors were closed. The side door had been forced. Inside it smelled stale and sweet. We moved quickly, taking sealed boxes of protein bars, dried fruit, nuts, bottled water, and simple first aid supplies. A pallet jack still worked. We loaded the bed of a yard pickup and rolled out slow, keeping eyes on every shadow. Halfway back, we saw 2 figures in the middle of the road, not rushing, just standing, swaying slightly. A third figure moved along the curb on a line that would intersect us if we drove straight. Riley kept both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2 and asked me if I was ready. I told her yes, even though I was never sure exactly what that meant. We took a left down a service alley and another left into a lot and came in the backside of the yard while keeping distance from the fence. It felt like too much movement and not enough cover. We talked afterward about creating routes we could secure, lines on a personal map we could follow without surprises. That night, we held a meeting at the office table with the radio off. Reed spread his map and pointed west. If the transmission was real and the milepost means what we think, the blocked line is in the Flint Hills, 50 miles. That's a long way to go on foot and a great way to attract every bad thing if we try to drive through the city. We're not driving, I said. We're riding. I let that hang for a beat because I needed to say it out loud myself. We have a decommissioned locomotive in the maintenance bay. She's missing parts but not beyond hope. If we can coax her prime mover back, charge her batteries, feed her fuel, and give her air, she'll pull cars. We could build a mobile refuge. We control our path. We don't get stuck at crossings because we are the crossing. Riley's eyes lit with the kind of hope she never lets show for long. Is that really possible? It is, I said, and I felt myself commit. I've revived worse. This looks like an SD70 series, 6 axles, each with a traction motor, diesel electric, roughly 4,000 horsepower from a 16-cylinder 2-stroke. She'll need a lot, batteries, priming, a love letter, but if we can make the systems talk to each other, she'll move. Miguel leaned forward on his elbows. We could armor the glass with mesh, cover intakes with grates, make a walkway between 2 flats with railing. We could weld on anchor points. We could make it a fortress that rolls. Reed didn't grin, but I could see the plan engine turning. We build our train, he said, not to smash through, to glide where we want and then stop when we need. Harper tapped the map where the main line showed a broad curve. We still need switches thrown, and some of them are far from here. I can give us the yard. Beyond that, we walk out and hand throw, or we send someone ahead in a high rail truck if we can find one. Also, we need to think about what noise we'll make. That engine won't be quiet. True, I said. But it's a different signal than a generator's drone or panicked cars. It's predictable. And if we control lights, avoid horn blows, and keep speed steady, we can minimize attention. We agreed on 3 tracks of work for the next days. 1. Reinforce the yard and build the diversion line so that if we had to leave fast, anything following noise would be routed somewhere that wasn't us. 2. Inventory fuel and build a filtration and heating system so any diesel we used would be clean and dry. 3. Assess the locomotive and build a checklist to bring her to life. The next morning, we began with the locomotive. She sat in the bay, nose paint faded, handrails scuffed. The model's stamping matched what I'd hoped, a heavy 6-axle SD70 type. The prime mover, a 710, was intact but had been partially disassembled for a yard repair months earlier and never put back into service. 2 piston packs sat on a bench like sleeping dogs. I ran through the checklist I keep in my head for engines like this. Fuel, oil, coolant, air, batteries, control circuits. We'll need at least 4 good batteries to get a decent crank, I said. We can bridge an external with heavy cables. We'll need to prime the fuel lines and purge air at the tower. We'll need to pre-lube because she's been sitting. Harper read the maintenance tag and found the last service date. Coolant was drained, she said. We'll need to refill. There's a tote in the corner we can mix. Miguel pulled a tarp off a crate and whistled softly when he saw what was inside. Spare piston assemblies, he said, eyes wide. Someone loved this engine. Then let's finish the job, I said. It took a day to clean, a half day to reassemble, and 2 days to make the supply lines talk again. In between, we did yard work. Reed and Miguel used the loader to build a low berm of ballast along the inside of the fence where the ground dipped. Riley organized 2 more supply runs to the warehouse district, timing them to moments of quiet, moving like a shadow, and returning with more boxes and a small pallet of canned tuna that felt like gold. Harper extended her control panel, labeled every toggle and fuse with a strip of tape and a neat hand, and taught us all how to use it. We had our first test of the diversion line on a windy evening when noise must have carried in an unlucky way. A cluster of infected drifted along the west fence, then another behind them. We stayed inside and watched through slits. Reed triggered the remote throw on the switch leading to the far siding, and I tapped a metal rod against a car ladder in a steady rhythm, then dragged it. The sound lifted into the night and moved down the track like music does. The group turned, followed the sound, and drifted through the opened points as if pulled by a string. When they were far enough, Reed flipped the toggle back. We kept watch. We waited for the kind of smart that sometimes shows up. It didn't. Not that time. On the fourth morning, I stood in the locomotive bay with a list in my hand and the feeling in my chest that precedes a start attempt. Riley, Harper, Reed, and Miguel formed a half circle. We had refilled coolant, refitted the 2 missing piston packs, lubed and primed. We had a filtered diesel supply line, fed from a tank we tapped and heated gently to drive off water. We had air pressure. We had batteries linked. Here's the sequence, I said, steady. We bring the control system live. We confirm no faults. We engage the starter and let the prime mover spin. If she catches, we babysit oil pressure and temps like hawks. We do not rush. If anything sounds wrong, we abort. Everyone clear on exits and eyewash. Miguel on fire watch. Miguel patted the extinguisher and the wool blanket we kept close. Ready. I took a breath. Okay, controls live. Harper threw the knife switch on the wall. The panel lights glowed amber and the diagnostic display blinked awake. For a second, I saw the yard as it had been when this bay was full of mechanics with painted names on their shirts and a radio playing morning talk. I pushed that away. No faults on first pass, I said. Starter engaged in 3. I nodded at Harper and she closed the starter contactor. The sound of the starter is a deep, grinding whirl that climbs as the engine spins up. The 710 turned, coughed, turned again. Oil pressure rose, temperature steady. I watched the gauges with my hand on the cutoff. The second cough took. The third became a rumble. The rumble became a throaty, low-frequency heartbeat that shivered the tools on the bench. The bay filled with a haze that smelled like possibility and diesel. She was alive. We didn't cheer until we had numbers that told us we were allowed to. Then we let out quiet whoops and laughed without making too much noise. And Miguel slapped the side of the casing and apologized to it like it was an old friend he was roughhousing. We proof at idle only today, I said, forcing us to be adults. We'll do a slow roll tomorrow if everything holds. That evening we ate tuna and crackers like a holiday and talked about rolling stock. We need a consist that's both livable and workable, Reed said. 2 flats up front to act as a bumper and a walkway with a rail. Behind the locomotive, a boxcar we seal and insulate as a living space. Another boxcar for stores. A gondola for scrap and ballast. If we can find a small tanker clean enough, water, we leave some here, Riley said quietly. If people come, it shouldn't be empty and hostile. We write notes, we mark caches. The point is not to take everything and flee. It's to move with purpose. Agreed, I said. We worked past dark-fitting mesh over the locomotive windows and grates over intakes. Miguel fabricated brackets for floodlights we swore not to use unless we had to. Harper ran cable to a simple bus inside the boxcar that would become our living space so we could charge radios and run a few LED strips off the locomotive's auxiliary power. Reed checked couplers and air hoses, replaced a gasket that would have leaked and chalked inspection marks like a ritual. Just past midnight, the radio spoke again. A voice, thin and stretched, on the same frequency and with the same cadence as before. Westbound consist, milepost 331, blocked by debris, supplies secure, low personnel, then static. Low personnel, Riley repeated. That's not a number, but it's something. Or less than we want to meet, I said. Or less than we want to be, Harper countered. We decided on a scouting run, not the full 50 miles, not yet, but a careful roll out of the yard at first light. to test systems, and to see what the immediate mainline looked like. If it was a canyon of stalled cars at every grade crossing with people pressing against the fence, we would know. If it was oddly empty, we would know that too. I slept little and woke with the feeling you get when you've built something, and now it will either hold or break. At dawn, we ran the checklist again. Oil, coolant, fuel, air. We started the prime mover and let it settle, then brought the traction systems online. Reed stood on the catwalk with a radio, calling out clearances. Harper took the panel and threw the yard switch we needed. Miguel walked point to the ladder track with a bright vest and a stop bat in case we had last-minute visitors. Riley watched from the office with binoculars, first aid kit at her feet, eyes moving but not blinking. "Brakes released," I said into the radio. "Notch 1. The locomotive rolled like a living thing stretching, slow at first, weight waking up. I kept the throttle low and my hands soft. We eased out of the bay and into the yard air. The sky was pale and thin, and the sound of the engine seemed too loud, even at idle. The wheels sang against the clean rails. We were momentum again instead of refusal. We rolled to the end of the yard throat at walking speed. Reed walked the front platform, scanning ahead. The main line lay straight for a long stretch, clear within our sight and then curving right. A grade crossing ahead had its gates down, and no cars beyond a few abandoned on the shoulder. We had never heard quiet sound so much like invitation. "Switch aligned," Harper said. "Clear to main." I eased us forward, hands steady. We crossed the joint and felt the slight bump where different steel meets. Out on the main, the ballast bed was smoother and the ties fresher. We moved like a secret. "Stop at the crossing," Riley said. "I want the approach clear and I want eyes on every direction." We did. The crossing was one of those near industrial parks, 4 lanes, wide sight lines. The gates were down, lights dead. The road was empty in every direction. I saw a dog a block away, standing in a doorway looking at us. Then it stepped back inside. "We roll half a mile," Reed said. "Then we come back. We do not get excited." We rolled. I pushed to notch 2, then back to 1. The rails had a light film of surface rust at the edges that polished off under our wheels. The wind hit my face at the open side window and carried the smell of cut grass and old machines. We passed a small creek, low and brown. We passed 3 cars parked oddly in a field, like someone had tried to make a camp and changed their mind. Half a mile, and then we stopped. Reed scanned with binoculars and I watched the side mirror for anything on the walkways. Harper put her hand on the control panel and then on the console, as if she was memorizing the vibration. Riley's voice on the radio was steady. "Let's not invite strangers. Come home." We reversed our run and tucked back into the yard like we were pushing into a known den. We aligned the switch back to our protected position and shut down to idle, then full stop, then silence. We did not know it then, but that quiet moment right after a first test is the one your memory hangs on to later. The before and the after, balancing for a second like it is possible to stay safe forever just by wanting it. We spent the next 2 days building the consist we had drawn on paper. The yard goat did most of the heavy pulls. The locomotive only moved when needed to conserve fuel and limit noise. We placed 2 flats up front, laid heavy timbers to create a continuous walkway between them, and welded low guardrails along the sides. We cut sheets of steel mesh to protect the front windows and the side door openings on the locomotive cab. Behind the engine, we coupled a clean boxcar. We scoured it and lined one corner with insulation and plywood to make a small bunk area with 2 stacked cots and a simple shelf. We mounted an LED strip under the shelf powered from the locomotive's auxiliary, and we installed a battery charger for handheld radios. Next was another boxcar for supplies, its floor marked out in chalk squares for food, medical, tools, and personal items. Then a gondola for scrap and for ballast we could use to fix track beds or build berms. Finally, a small tanker that had been used for water before, its placard still clean and blessedly absent of hazardous symbols. We rinsed it and chlorinated. Riley drew up a water test plan using the field kit she'd brought. The readings were not pristine, but they were in ranges we could work with if we treated and boiled. Fuel was the constant math problem. The yard's diesel tanks still had a working pump handle, and we filtered and heated the fuel to drive off water. We estimated consumption by the hour at idle and by the mile under load. We ran the numbers like a prayer. At gentle speed, I said, 400 to 500 gallons could move us 50 to 80 miles if we're mindful and the grade is kind. That's theory. Reality will negotiate with us. Riley kept us honest. No bravado, she said. We will not roll into a dark unknown on the edge of fumes because we liked a number on a page. On the third night after the test, a storm brushed the city. Lightning in the distance, the smell of rain, the freight yard shadows going momentarily sharp in flashes. In the middle of it, the infected drifted through the edges like moths that didn't know where the light went. We stayed tight and quiet. The hand-crank siren stayed under the desk. The new mesh on the windows shed the rain like it had been born to that job. At 1:06 a.m., the radio spoke again. The voice was thinner. Westbound consist, 331, blocked. Personnel down to 3, food secure, extraction unknown. Down to 3, Riley said, eyes on the speaker but seeing the people we didn't know. We can't keep hearing that like it's just data. Reed looked at me. We didn't have to say it. The plan had been to ready ourselves for a departure within a week. That night, the plan moved itself forward. We met at the office table in the morning with a map, the radio log, and an inventory list. We spread the cost of risk out on the page. We were not a crew that liked rolling dice. But some risks don't ask if you like them. They ask if you are awake. We depart at last light, Reed said. After the city settles into its evening rhythm, we run dark as possible. We keep speed low to reduce noise and to watch our track. Harper will run ahead on the catwalk with a light hooded and peel the hood when we approach any switch we don't control. If we must stop, we stop with discipline. What about the yard? Miguel asked quietly. We built it to hold. We leave it better than we found it, Riley said. Caches marked, notes written, a message painted on the inside of the office door. Water here, basic supplies here. Turn on the generator only in daylight. Keep quiet at night. Use the diversion switch to draw attention away. We leave something because someone left the generator and the spare parts and the diagrams for us. I wrote the notes in thick marker with my penmanship that a foreman once said looked like I was etching it into steel. Harper printed a simple map with arrows that labelled the remote throws. Miguel welded one last brace onto the generator cage and left a socket set with a note under it. If you know what this is, you'll know why I left it. The last hour before departure moved slowly. We loaded the last boxes into the supply car and strapped everything down with ratchet straps. Riley stocked the medical crate and lashed it to the wall near the door. I ran the engine to operating temperature and watched numbers like I had never watched them in my life. Oil pressure steady, coolant stable, no alarms. I checked the traction motors for heat with the back of my hand, the way old mechanics taught me. Harper coiled cables and zipped ties into small bundles so nothing would snag. Reed walked the consist front to back and checked every coupler, every hose, every ladder. Miguel stood on the front platform with his helmet hooked at his belt and looked out across the yard like he was trying to memorize how it had looked when it was ours. Time, Riley said from the catwalk. Let's go earn the next page. We brought the engine up and eased toward the throat. Harper threw the switch to the main and we rolled our little city of steel into the bigger one. The last light was a thin band under a heavy sky. The city in the distance looked like it had forgotten everything a city is supposed to do except stand there. At the first crossing, we stopped and listened. A single bicycle lay on its side in the road, and a flag flapped soft on a pole. No people close. We moved on. We kept a speed that would not outrun our ability to see. We passed a yard full of containers that had become a wall and saw shadows moving behind slits. We passed a park where the swings moved in the wind and nothing else did. 2 miles out, the first obstruction. A truck parked too close to the rails at an angle that would scrape our cars. We stopped with the nose 20 paces away and stepped off with caution. Miguel and I carried long pry bars and a small jack. Reed and Harper covered us from the platform, Riley from the boxcar door with binoculars. We worked in silence, jack, pry, inch by inch. The truck rolled just enough for us to be satisfied. Before we climbed back aboard, I pulled the hood release and snapped the antenna off, not because it mattered to the engine, but because I didn't want noise in the wind. We rolled again. The engine's tone blended with the evening insects. The rails curved us into neighborhoods, and then out along belts of trees, and then back behind small factories. We saw signs that someone had tried something here and there. Makeshift barricades, stacked pallets, a door nailed shut with too many nails. We kept our eyes forward. At mile 12, we saw a hand-thrown switch set against us. We stopped short, and Harper stepped down with a hooded light. She moved to the switch stand, checked the points, then the lock. She waved and threw it, then stepped clear. The little ordinary movements felt like ringing a bell in a ruined church. The world hadn't forgotten everything. We made 20 miles before the light was gone enough that we decided to put down for the night. We chose a section of track elevated on a small fill, with gentle slopes on both sides and a long straight stretch for visibility. We stopped with the gondola over a culvert so that if anything came along the ditch, it would slow itself in the brush. We set a watch rotation. We turned the engine down to a low idle for an hour to charge our auxiliary and then shut it completely. The quiet felt like a blanket, but not the warm kind. We lay on cots and on the floor of the boxcar. The smell of oil and wood and people felt like a shelter even if the walls were steel. I woke to a clank, not a loud one, but the right kind to wake me. I slid off the cot and moved to the door. Reed was already there with his hand raised to stop me from stepping out. He pointed with 2 fingers. On the far end of our train, no more than 50 yards away, 2 figures moved slowly along the ballast. They weren't rushing or thrashing. They were exploring with hands and heads, like people who had lost their glasses. They reached the side of the gondola and put palms flat on the steel, then moved on. We stayed inside. We stayed quiet. After a few minutes, they drifted down the slope and into the tree line as if a wind had turned them. Morning came pale and brittle. We ate quietly and brought the engine online. The second day felt less like an experiment and more like a drive with a destination. The land opened up into flatter country with long rails that ran as straight as the section crews could lay them. We passed a grain elevator and a siding choked with empty hoppers. We passed a water tower where someone had painted a name and a plea in big letters. We didn't stop, not because we didn't care, but because we had set a purpose and we had to be faithful to it. Around 40 miles, the first real trouble. A grade crossing had become a knot of vehicles, trucks and sedans, and a bus that had tried to push through and had locked axles over the rails. Someone had tried to clear it earlier. Tire tracks dug deep ruts. A tow chain lay broken like a dropped necklace. We stopped and walked the line. The bus was the problem. A front wheel off its bead, the body twisted just enough to hang over the far rail. "We can move the smaller cars with jacks and pry bars," Reed said. "The bus is heavy. We either spend a day here or we get clever." "Clever now," I said, not because I wanted to rush, but because a knot like this is a magnet for all the wrong things. We use leverage, and rails like rails are meant to be used. We'll lay a short ramp from ties to let the bus pivot. Then we winch. "Winch?" Riley asked, eyebrow raised. I tapped the locomotive's front end. "We have a coupler-mounted chain hoist in the tool cage and a set of slings. We rig from the front platform, keep slack out, and use just enough pull to coax it, not brute force. We don't want to bounce anything off a rail." Miguel grinned. I knew there was a reason I packed extra chain. It took most of an hour to rig, but the plan worked. We set a pair of ties as skids layered with a sheet of steel from the gondola. We chocked wheels that didn't need to move. We hooked the chain hoist to a structural point on the bus frame and took up tension until the chain rang tight. With everyone clear and talking in calm voices, I inched the hoist and watched the angle change. The bus shifted a hand's breadth, then another. The wheel rolled up onto the skid and then dropped gently beyond the rail. We reversed the hoist and reset it for the other side. A slow dance. When the bus was clear, we stepped back and breathed out, because breathing in had been squeezed. We cleared cars next with pry bars and a jack, moved a sedan by pivoting it on a piece of pipe like a rollerman's trick, and left the line passable for the next group that might come this way with less steel than we had. We rolled again, slower now, more alert. The land out here started to wave gently, the way the Flint Hills do. Grass like a sea that makes you want to lower your voice. We passed milepost markers and counted them. 329, 330. We were close to the mile number the radio had given. At 331, the track curved into a shallow cut where the hillside had slumped during an earlier rain. A tangle of small trees and rock had blocked the line. Beyond the debris, half visible through branches and debris, a line of freight cars sat. The first was a flat with a green container. The second, a boxcar with a stenciled code I recognized as military logistics. The third, another boxcar. Behind those, I caught a glint of silver that could be a tanker. We stopped short. Everything in me wanted to walk forward fast. Everything else in me told me to stop being a child. We do this in layers, I said. Eyes, ears, then hands. Reed stepped onto the front platform with binoculars. He scanned the cut, then the top of the slope, then the cars. Harper listened with the little parabolic microphone she had insistently carried for 3 days and kept getting teased for. Wind, she said. Movement like a tarp, maybe. No voices. Riley tapped the radio. If anyone is alive on that consist, they've heard our engine and they're choosing not to answer. That means either they can't or they won't. We treat it as both. We moved forward in small steps, using the flats to shield us. The debris pile wasn't huge. 2 small trees, rock, soil. A shovel would be slow. Muscle would be faster, but loud. I looked at the gondola and the loader strapped inside it and did the math. We'll do it by hand for 10 minutes, I said. If we don't make a dent, we bring the loader down with ramps. Miguel and I worked the top with a pair of long pries and pulled branches aside, while Reed watched the cut edge. When we had a lane through the worst of it, we used the pry bars to lever the rocks. We made a space wide enough for one axle and then the other. I checked the slope above for loose chunks that might follow us down, stable enough. We moved forward until the nose of the locomotive was a car length from the first freight car of the stranded consist. Up close, I saw details that were both reassuring and heavy. The stencils on the boxcar doors listed contents: non-perishable food, water purification, medical, shelter modules. The seals on the doors had been cut cleanly, not ripped. Someone had opened them, like someone who uses bolt cutters for a living. A ladder lay on the ballast. A chalk mark on the side read, Day 3 check. Harper, Reed said softly. See anything? She lowered the binoculars and swallowed. There's a person sitting inside the open door of the second boxcar, she said. Head down, not moving. Riley's jaw set in the way medical professionals' jaws set when they choose the only choice. I'm going, she said. Under watch, with the kit. If the person stands up and moves toward me in a way I don't like, I'll move back. If they speak like a person who needs help, I'll help. I'll cover the top of the cut, Reed said. Harper, eyes on the slope. Aaron, you and Miguel are my anchors. Riley stepped down with her hands open. Hello, she called, voice firm and clear. We're here to help. Stay where you are. I'm coming to you. She walked slow into the cut, boots crunching on ballast. When she reached the open door, she stopped and put a hand on the steel like she was asking permission. Then she stepped up and into the shadow. There was a beat, then a small voice, unmistakably human. Don't come any closer. I don't know if I'm sick. Riley's voice softened but stayed strong. Can you tell me your name? Parker, the voice said. Specialist Parker, logistics. There were 5 of us. We're 3 now. We tried to clear the line. We couldn't. Parker, Riley said. We're going to get you out. We have masks. We can screen you outside and give you water. If you're not well, we'll protect both of us. If you are, you're coming with us." A long, shuddering breath, and then okay. We moved like we were diffusing a memory. Riley guided Parker down. He was in his 20s with sunburn across his nose and a bandage around his forearm that had been changed more than once with clean technique. His eyes were dry but tired. He held his hands in front of him like someone who doesn't want to be a problem. Behind him, a woman our age stepped into the light with a hand on the door jamb. "Sergeant Harmon," she said, voice hoarse. "We're happy to see you." Riley masked both of them, then herself, then did a quick assessment. Pulse, respiration, pupils, skin. "No obvious symptoms," she said. "Dehydrated, exhausted, no obvious active fever. The bandage looks like a laceration on the forearm, not a bite pattern. We'll still treat it as unknown." "Third?" Reed asked gently. "Up top," Harmon said, chin lifting toward the cut edge. "On watch. Ben. He didn't make it yesterday. We did what we needed to do. We're down to what you see." A third figure appeared at the top of the slope and sat, watching us through a scope. He lifted a hand that was not threatening. "Private Cole," he called. "No bites. I can come down if you want. I won't rush you." "We want," Riley said, and smiled with her eyes. We brought them into our boxcar and kept masks in place while Riley did a more thorough assessment with the kit. Parker's wound was a deep cut, likely from a jagged bracket. Clean. No signs of infection beyond what you expect. Harmon's hands trembled like an overtaxed motor. Cole drank water like he had forgotten how and was remembering by practicing. We didn't ask right away what had happened to the other two. They told us anyway after a while, in tidy sentences that had been rehearsed in the dark when people try to make difficult things neat. They had been escorting the train west, the line blocked by a slump. They had started clearing. One of the team slipped and broke a leg badly. Infection was everywhere. They held and held until they couldn't. Then they waited, because what else is there sometimes? We didn't celebrate. We did what crews do. We made a plan to move everything slightly better than it had been. We walked the length of the train and counted cars. 4 boxcars with logistics markings, 1 flat. The silver I'd glimpsed was a stainless water tanker, clean. The locomotives that had brought the train were not here. They had likely been decoupled and sent for help that never returned. "Can your train move?" Cole asked, wonder in his voice, because he wanted it so badly. "It can," I said, "and it can pull yours." We set to work clearing the rest of the debris. We brought down the small loader and used it like a careful hand. We cut branches. We moved rock into the gondola. We tamped the ballast with shovels and boot heels. We threw the hand switch beyond the cut and checked the points twice. We coupled to the first car with a satisfying clank that sounded like how a solution should sound. Reed stood by my shoulder at the controls. "Slow and smooth," he said. "We take slack gently. We don't break anyone's neck." I nodded and eased the throttle. The coupler took the weight. The train stretched, and the cars slid like they'd been waiting for us. We brought them through the cut, one by one. Every time a wheel hit the spot where the slump had marred the alignment, the car rocked slightly and then straightened. When the last tanker cleared, we set handbrakes on the far cut and let ourselves breathe for a beat. "Decision time," Harper said, eyes on me and then on Riley and Reed. "Do we bring the whole thing east to the yard? Do we go farther west to see if the line clears? Do we stage here and think?" Riley answered first. "We stage and think, but not long. We have vulnerable people who have been strong for too long. We have logistics we can now protect better while moving than sitting. We know our yard. We do not know what waits 10 miles farther west." Reed nodded. "Back to the yard," he said. "We can do return trips if the line holds. We are not heroes, we're stewards." We assembled the consist with our locomotive at the front, our 2 flats next, then the recovered boxcars, the water tanker, our own boxcars, and the gondola last. It made for a heavy pull, but within what we could handle if we stayed gentle and kept speeds modest. The return run felt different. The landscape looked smaller, not because it had shrunk, but because purpose right-sizes the world. We made the grade crossing with the cleared bus without drama, past the empty park, the dog's doorway, the quiet warehouse. When the yard came into view, it was like seeing a harbour. The fence shimmered with heat, the mesh on the windows caught the light, and the office looked like a watchman's post. We eased the consist into the yard throat. Harper threw the necessary switches, and we tucked the train along the longest track, leaving the main clear in case anyone else had somehow found steel that could still move. We shut down to idle and let the engine cool like a runner coming off a long race. The rest of that day, we spent making what we'd found into something we could keep. We inventoried the boxcars. They held more than we'd hoped. Food in sealed cases, rice, beans, canned vegetables, ready-to-eat items, water purification tablets and portable filters, medical supplies packaged in hard cases with labels, shelter modules we could use to partition the boxcar or set up in the yard if we needed space. Parker cried once and tried to pretend he hadn't. Riley put a hand on his shoulder and said what needed saying. We were going to use what the people who packed these cars wanted us to use in the first place, to survive with purpose. That night, the storm finally arrived proper. Rain in sheets, wind that pressed our welded mesh and rattled every loose thing we'd forgotten to tie down. The generator kept the shop lights glowing softly. The locomotive sat in the dark like a sleeping animal. We rotated watch in pairs. At 3:12 a.m., the radio spoke again. But this time, it wasn't the lonely voice repeating a location. It was a different tone, a different weight behind the words. To any rail-capable unit in the Kansas City region, the voice said, this is a relay station monitoring the central corridor. If you are moving, conserve fuel. If you are static, harden your position. Small groups have better outcomes when they coordinate. If you can transmit, identify by milepost when safe. Harper looked at me. Reed exhaled. Riley closed her eyes briefly and then opened them sharper than before. We didn't answer that night. We listened. We wrote down the wording like we were copying an equation. The next morning, after we'd had coffee that tasted like home, we sat around the office table again, and we did what we do. We turned the information into a plan. We would not leave the yard behind forever. We would not sit and calcify. We would become what the rails had made possible. A group that could move, help, retrieve, return, and fortify. We would use our mobile refuge to bring back what we could, people first, then supplies, on runs we planned carefully and executed like the professionals we had become by necessity. We didn't decide this with speeches. We decided it with lists. We sketched a schedule for rest, for maintenance, for training Parker, Harmon, and Cole on our systems, so they were not passengers, but crew. We planned our next westbound run to clear more debris and to stage caches, water, notes, simple tools, at mile markers where we could point other survivors towards something they could use. We drew a big arrow on the office wall map, back to a phrase we'd been circling since the first night, mobility with purpose. The runs became our heartbeat. We would roll at first light or at dusk, depending on weather and what the radio said. We would move slow, never faster than our eyes could clear. We would stop for real obstacles and solve them with leverage and patience. We would not stop for every lonely thing that called to us, because you can't if you intend to keep your promise to the people already in your care. We learned to live with that guilt without letting it drive us into ruin. We learned other small things, the way to lay a steel plate over a broken joint and secure it with spikes long enough to hold for a run, but short enough to pull later. The way to check traction motor cases by hand for heat. The way to quiet a squealing belt with a soap bar when you're 50 miles from the parts bin and need one more hour of run. The way to make coffee on a small stove in a rocking boxcar without scolding anyone. The way to sleep in 2-hour blocks and still be human. We learned to listen for changes in the engine's tone, the way you listen for a loved one's breath in another room. On the 5th run west, we found a small group at a siding, an older couple, a teenager, and a man with a bandaged ankle who waved a towel like a flag. We did that rescue slowly and cleanly. We masked, we screamed, we helped them aboard, and we wrote another set of notes in our book, where we'd found them, what we'd given them, what we'd promised them. We didn't promise much. We promised to try to get them to safety, to give them water that wouldn't make them sicker, to let them sleep without watching the door. On the 7th run, we found evidence that someone else with steel had moved through farther west. A set of fresh rail marks, debris cleared in a clean way that looked like ours but wasn't. We left a note in a plastic sleeve wired to a milepost. We are east. We have a yard. If you can leave notes, leave them. If you can broadcast, give a time. We wrote it in block letters like we were writing to our future. Some nights were heavy. Some days were light. There was the morning when Miguel welded a little sun symbol on the guardrail of the front flat and told me he'd never welded art in his life and didn't know why it felt like oxygen. There was the afternoon when Parker learned how to lace a brake hose and did it fast and clean and then walked away like he had made something sacred. There were moments where we would all go still because we heard singing somewhere, always distant, always a single voice. And we'd realize it was the rails themselves under temperature change, metal talking to itself, and we'd smile at our own jumpiness and then go back to work. We never forgot that the yard had been our first shelter. We kept it ready. We installed a simple manual pump for water so the next person wouldn't need the generator to drink. We left a bin of protein bars under the desk with a big label that said, "Take enough, leave some." We painted arrows to the relay panel and wrote notes on how to use it without putting yourself in the line of danger. We cleared a space in the supply boxcar where we kept a duffel of items we would leave behind if we encountered a group we couldn't carry that day. Water, a map page, a letter that explained what we had learned about moving quietly and not following noise. We didn't become legends. We became a process. We became a crew with roles and redundancy. When Reed twisted his knee in a ballast hole, Cole took over walking point and did it with the sober grace of a man who knew yanking at a knot makes it tighter. When Harper lost her voice for 3 days, Harmon ran the panel with the same attention to labeling and rhythm. When I had a day where the sound of the engine made me want to sit down and let everything pass without me, Riley handed me a cup of coffee and told me to sit for 10 minutes and that it would be 10 minutes, not a day, because structure is mercy. One evening, near the edge of the Flint Hills, we saw a string of lights on a ridge that did not look like starlight or fire. We stopped and watched for a long time. The lights moved in a pattern. After a moment, Harper made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Wind turbines," she said. "They still turn." We sat on the flat car and watched them until the wind shifted and the blades moved differently. It felt like a thing we needed to put in the good column. The radio grew more useful as weeks unspooled. The relay voice repeated guidance in calm tones. Once, late in the night, a different station read a list of mileposts and times where someone had left water and notes. We added our milepost to the paper with heavy lines like stitches on cloth. Sometimes we got nothing but weather. Sometimes that was plenty. We had scares. We had a day when a small group rushed the front of the consist at a crossing, and we had to decide whether to sound the horn and push through or shut down and sit in the cars with the doors barred and wait for them to drift away. We chose waiting, and it took 3 hours, and we had to sit with our own anxiety like it was a fire in the same room. We had a night when a branch took out part of the mesh over the side window, and we spent an hour replacing it in the rain. We had a morning when we stopped to clear an obstacle and heard movement in the trees that wasn't the wind. We moved away without confirming whether it was people who might need us or people who might end us. We remembered it for too long, the way you do with decisions that don't satisfy your sense of being good. We didn't forget the beginning either. Some afternoons I would walk up to the office catwalk with a mug and look down into the yard and remember how empty it had felt that first morning. Now the emptiness had lines to it. The barricades were cleaner, the mesh was tighter, the notes posted beside the door had been read and replaced with updated versions. The generator purred like it trusted us. The reefer box glowed. The place looked like a thing shaped by hands. On a clear morning, 3 weeks after the first departure, we rolled west with a specific mission. The relay had broadcast a request the previous night. If any rail-capable group could retrieve a crate of water filters from a stranded siding at milepost 350 and bring them east, it would help a shelter near the river. We assembled early, checked the engine with extra care, and brought the consist into motion. With that feeling is something like relief disguised as purpose. The siding at 350 lay under a stand of cottonwoods. The crate was where the relay had said it would be, strapped to a pallet within a small shelter, stenciled with codes. We loaded it into the supply car and left a note behind that said, "Taken by rail eastward, date, time." When we rolled back into our yard before dusk, the office felt like a station house again. We broadcast our milepost and the fact that we had the crate. The relay answered in a voice we were starting to know. "Copy. Thank you. You are not alone." We weren't. That was the whole point. I don't know if this is the part of the story where I'm supposed to tell you that everything became easy because we built a machine that could move. It didn't. It became workable. It became something we could keep doing. It became a structure we could stand inside that let us take the kind of risks that have a reason. We kept the rules that had found us at the beginning. Speak clearly. Move with a purpose. Don't do hero moves. We added a few. Leave notes. Leave caches. Teach what you know. Write down what went wrong and what you did to make it less wrong next time. We learned that trust and control are not enemies. You steer with control and you survive with trust. If someone had told me that at the start, I would have nodded like I understood. It took living inside Steel and Choice to realize what it meant. Some nights, late, when the engine was quiet and the boxcar lights were off and we'd closed our eyes, I would hear the rails pop softly as they cooled and think of all the other lines running out in every direction. A rail is a promise from one place to another. We kept to that promise the only way we could, by moving when we had to, by stopping when we should, by holding each other to processes that are boring until they save your life. One evening, near sunset, we returned from a westbound run with the last of the supplies from the stranded train and a person we had met at a siding who had been sleeping in a crane cab and reading an old paperback by headlamp. We pulled into our yard and I shut the engine down and listened to it tick into cooling. Reed climbed the steps into the office and leaned on the doorframe. He looked at the map on the wall where our lines and notes had started to form a pattern you could call a plan. "You know," he said, "when this started, I thought the only choice was to sit behind a wall until you couldn't, or run until you couldn't. Nobody told me you could do both if you chose where and how. Nobody told any of us," I said. "We had to build it to know." In the morning, we would leave again, because that's what we did. We would check oil and air and belts. We would test radios and label the toggles one more time, because someone always wears the label off if you do this long enough. We would make coffee on a small stove in a rocking car. We would breathe, and sometimes we would laugh. We would keep the promise. We would keep the rails talking between one place and another. And if you're listening to this on a radio somewhere, sitting in a place that feels too small or too loud or too empty, if you hear steel rumble past someday and you wonder if you should come to the fence and wave, do it slow, do it careful, mask up if you can, and hold both your hands where we can see them. We'll stop if it's safe. We'll help if we can. We're moving with purpose, and there is room on the flat car if you can follow the rules that keep people alive. We are the Trainyard Refuge. We started by surviving. We kept going by taking that survival and giving it shape. We haven't found an ending. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe there's just the next milepost and what you decide to do when you reach it. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.